we have just had a bit of a side conversation going on for those who may not have been around that we're now available tomorrow morning because the Māori Committee is no longer going ahead. So there was a general consensus by the majority that were in the room at the time that we would block that out if required as opposed to tomorrow afternoon. So just letting you know that, but hopefully all going to plan, we can get this finished today. So just to review back on the recommendations that we put through for item number 2 in the consultation document around water. And Councillor Bogue, you got a copy of that sent through to you for review?
Yes, I did. Can I just say something while I'm still unmuted? It's great, it's fabulous, everything, I agree with. I just wondered, this is the old English teacher coming in, reconfirms 3 waters if it should be capital T and capital W, because it is a particular program, so capital T and capital W for 3 waters would be my suggestion.
That's fine. So if we could just do a quick review of that and confirm that we're happy with that, and then we can move on to the next item. Okay, no one has anything to add, or very good, thank you very much. So moving on to the third consultation document topic, which was the curbside waste collection, another inform piece with a total of 150 submitters. And of course this service is due to commence on the 1st of October. So just to open up for any questions that councillors may have. Councillor Wright.
I was just wanting to confirmation on what the rebate might be for those that don't use it weekly.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for that question, and it is a good question. At this point in time, we haven't finalised what that rebate might be. It will be related to how many we opt into that. I guess the key point here is that the weight of rubbish component is actually a small part of the total cost of providing the service, and so there will be a pure calculation on what fortnightly collection might mean in terms of the, that part of the cost of the service, and it may be that council wish to incentivise further beyond the reduction in cost of those people. So the team will bring some options to council to consider as we develop that up. So just touching on the rebate system, we will from day one be able to measure how often people put their bins out, and so people that opt in will receive the rebate in the following financial year through their rates as opposed to immediately.
So they won't know what that rebate is until the end of the year?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not saying it'll take us a year to figure that out, but we just haven't done that yet. Ideally, we'd have that information available as early as possible.
Just exploring your other comment is that we could opt to further incentivise people putting out their bins less and creating less rubbish by subsidising a rebate to do that.
Correct.
Wonderful, thank you.
Councillor McGrath.
Just through the chair, I noticed when I read a lot of the submissions, there seemed to be some confusion around perhaps the size of the bins. I guess out in the community you seem to see the 240 litre ones everywhere. But is there any way we can just let our residents know that it is actually a smaller bin? Because there seems to be a lot of fear about being able to move this thing and they're just not the big 240s.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yeah, thank you for that. We can always put more information out, and I guess with that feedback, that's a suggestion that despite what we have out there, that we need to continue to reiterate that message. So The service does come with a 120 litre wheelie bin, and that is the equivalent volume of 2 black rubbish bags. That is the current service, and the average weight of rubbish disposed of in 2 rubbish bags is quite low, notwithstanding the ability to put heavier stuff in a bin does exist. It's also worth pointing out that we do have an opt-in assisted service for those that might struggle either with their geographical location and only having steps, or perhaps unable to manage a wheelie bin.
Thank you.
Just further to that, John, there had been a decision to actually have one of the bins at the customer services office in Hastings Street, and for people to go and have a look at if they wanted to. Has that been put in place as yet?
That's a great question. I'll come back to you on that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Worship. This is probably addressed through to Adele. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is a fixed figure in our rates relative to the curbside collection.
I believe it is a separate recognition of the cost of that service. It's not just about simply the curbside collection. It is about the wider scope of service, transfer stations, education, and so on and so forth. So it reflects the cost of our collection and disposal service, but also everything else that needs to go into providing that.
Yes. So my question really is, if there are people who opt out of the system, the calculation would have of this part of the system would have to come out of that fee, or that fixed fee that you're setting for waste disposal. And if it's fixed in the rates for this current year, what effect will that have on the financial take if people opt out?
Through you, Madam Mayor, just ensuring that I understand your question properly so that I can give you the right answer. Because we have a fixed fee in our rating system now for that service in this financial year, how do we recognise the changing in cost for people that might opt into a fortnightly collection service? I guess the benefits of that rebate only being available in the following financial year is that we will have all of that data from this year to go into our model to determine how we fix our charges or our rating component in the following year, as opposed to trying to do that on the fly within the same year. Wouldn't. Yeah, there is also the option of a credit back, but certainly where it comes to perhaps a subsidisation to further incentivise low wasters, that is a very good point. So hopefully I've given you some answer there.
So simplistically, it can only be done in the following year.
Well, no, that's not quite correct. It could be done this year, but because there is still the opportunity for people to opt in, because we've set the fee now, that may not deliver a fully balanced budget at the end of the financial year, and there's always would have to be adjustments to meet any under or overfunding, I guess. And certainly in my experience in the past with exactly this component, it's very, very difficult to model when you have no data in which to put into that model. And that's what our initial term of this contract will allow us to do.
And through the Mayor, Caroline's just working on some additional information at the moment about how it's all built up, but as I understand, the expectation is once we knew and had more information around the requirements, then we could put the credit back against the following year. So, in the first instance, we're assuming everyone's opting in, and then we've got more information, and as it flows through the contract, then we can adjust for that as well.
Councillor Brown, followed by Councillor Tapani.
Through you, Your Worship. There's been raised a lot of concerns around the practicality of these bins on the hill and in other private properties. Could you speak to the work that we're doing around that to help our community in that space?
Certainly, through you, Madam Mayor, that is a very real consideration, and our small team is working with our contractor to identify where those localities may exist. Sometimes that may require residents to locate their bin in a place where it can be collected easily. Sometimes that might be about the gradient or the access on that street. In other places where we're aware of properties that only have perhaps narrow stair access to their properties, then we'll work through those on a case-by-case basis. And I'm aware of a few properties where maybe actually they might have to leave that bin at the front of their property, inside their boundary, and carry a bag to that bin, which is obviously not the not the ideal situation, but part of the reason we have bins is to meet the health and safety requirements of our contractors who are collecting the rubbish. And when we went through our tender process, no contractor was prepared to tender for a rubbish bag collection. So there will be some cases where we have to compromise.
And supplementary to that, so if a resident has a concern around how they're personally going to manage, should they contact us through the customer services team? Is that the...
Yes, that is one option, and I'd imagine that a service request would be raised for the waste minimisation team to make contact and work through that scenario with those properties. I imagine there'll be a number of them, and it will take some time. So,
Thank you.
My question was, sorry.
No, Councillor Tapani, you were next.
Supplementary question, just sort of carrying on from Councillor Brown's questions around multiplex and hill-based properties. So thank you for those responses. John, could you also extend your response to the catered solutions being developed around our commercial sector and whether we have sufficient resource to continue that work? As the rollout of the contract didn't really provide consideration for the historical delivery of services to our commercial sector, that was a new, as such, level of service going forward. And I understand that that was still under development with our commercial sector as we address some of those recycling or levels of waste coming from the commercial sector.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd just seek a bit of clarification to make sure my understanding of the question is correct. There's two components. I take it there's two components you're referring to. One is recycling and maybe specifically cardboard within the CBDs. Yep. And then the other with regard to the CBD is bins versus bags. Like summarise that?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you for entertaining that clarification. So with regard to the collection and recycling of cardboard within our CBDs, that is not a service that Council has provided directly to our CBD ratepayers. That is a collection service that our refuse collection contractor has provided directly to those businesses. So there was actually no charge to those businesses for that collection, and they were able to provide that because the cardboard and fibre that they collected had some value. Today, that cardboard and fibre has no value, so there's no income from collecting that. That pays, one, for the cost of providing that service and then delivering a profit to that contractor. So they have informed us that they will no longer provide that service. For Council to pick up that service would be an extra cost to ratepayers. And at the time where we were working through this, our team was managing the rollout of a recycling collection contract and receptacles, as well as gearing up to do the same for the refuse collection contract. So there was no capacity in the team to look at how that might be provided. And certainly in our current environment around affordability, that wasn't a priority for the team at that point in time. That's not to say that if there's a desire and a willingness to pay for that service, that it couldn't be considered. We simply haven't had the available time to do that. So that's hopefully answered your question or provided a response on the cardboard side of things. With regard to the wheelie bins versus bags in the CBD areas, and it's probably worth clarifying this is not just in Napier, but it also includes Ahuriri, Onikawa and Taradale areas. We did look to inform our procurement process with different options, and we did engage with our own teams around can we continue to internally provide a bag collection service in the CBD. We also asked our tendering contractors to provide a separate or a separable portion in their tenders to provide that wheelie bin service for collection of refuse. And that demonstrated that the wheelie bin option was much more cost effective within the CBDs. It's important to remember that in our CBDs we don't collect refuse simply once a week. In our different CBD areas it's multiple times a week and variable across those different locations that we've talked about there. There is some concern about being able to locate a wheelie bin in some of those businesses. And again, that's where we'll be working through with those businesses on how that might be achieved. Notwithstanding a 120 litre wheelie bin doesn't have a huge footprint.
Councillor Price.
My question is just further to Councillor Brown's. Can we have some system in place for day one for people having difficulty on the hill, probably the main place? And can we give some publicity to what action can be taken by residents who do have difficulty? Otherwise we're going to get bashed on day one by unhappy people who do pay for the service.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for that question. It's a good question. We do have, as part of our contract, and we tendered on and obtained prices from our contractors, an assisted service fee. And just for clarity, that's the cost to council to provide that assisted service. I think there's still some thinking to go as to whether that cost is passed on or not, and that's probably for council to consider. However, that's where, and as part of our comms, as we roll out our wheelie bins for people to contact council, either through the customer service centre or directly to that team to have that conversation about whether they opt in or not. There will be some conditions around that. We certainly, from a health and safety perspective, the contractors don't want to be having to go to the rear of a property out of sight of a street to collect the bin. And so we'll work with property owners to find a solution that meets both parties' needs.
Just a further question to that. Yes. So will that be publicised prior to the date, day 1st of October, that there is this system in place?
That
on
is
Facebook and the website?
Sorry, thought you finished. Through Madam Mayor, yes, that is the intention.
Thank you.
Just through the Mayor, to add to that, there is a brochure being developed as we speak.
I'm just concerned for the two ward councillors in the hill.
Perhaps they could do the door knocking.
Councillor Crown, followed by Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you. My question is actually in line with the one before, you've mentioned, John, about education and communication around this. I see a fifth of the submitters actually have the perception that moving to the bins is contrary to the principles of waste minimisation, and obviously the decision to go to bins was as a result of the joint waste minimisation plan. So I'm wondering what our plans are in regards to education and communication around perception and behaviour change, since that's what we're geared towards.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's a fantastic question. And to, I guess, summarise, we, as a council, along with every other council in New Zealand, undertake what's called a swap survey on a regular basis, which is an analysis of all of the material that's going into our landfill from the different sources, whether that's residential, commercial, industrial, or what have you. And what that's demonstrating is, on average, possibly up to 85% of material going to landfill could be reused, recycled, or what have you. A large component of that is green waste, lawn clippings, garden clippings, or so on and so forth. So when you have a closed rubbish bag, you simply don't know what's in there. And with the wheelie bins, the trucks are equipped with cameras, and the operators of those trucks observe what's going into or coming out of that bin as it's tipped into the truck. And their data collection system has the ability to tag that lifting location against the RFID tag in the bins that ties that to an address. And so they'll be collecting that data, and anyone that is putting prohibited material into the bin that's going to landfill, and each bin will be stamped with what is allowed and what isn't allowed, along with information pamphlets when they're distributed, and information available on the website about what is prohibited and what is an accepted product into those bins. So we can, off that data, communicate with those people that are perhaps dumping prohibited materials about that and follow up on that. Ultimately, if that is a recidivist activity, then potentially there's the opportunity to remove the service. Obviously, that's an extreme, and we'd like to take the education path to the greatest extent possible.
And so supplementary, what are the plans for that sharing of education? I'm thinking before it gets to the stage of a slap on the wrist.
Great question. So as I mentioned, prohibited materials will be identified on the bin lid and inside the bin lid. But when those bins are rolled out, there'll be a hard copy pamphlet of what is prohibited and what is not. And I guess part of the communication and engagement plan is to talk about all of those sorts of things and the whys around why we should not put that sort of material in our landfills. And there's a number of environmental and economic drivers around that.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a couple of questions, John, and submissions around the availability of the data we will be collecting. And I just wonder if you could confirm for me on the data we will collect, for instance, the number of pickups, how many people in that first year are only choosing to put it out fortnightly, etc. And then I suppose there'll be other data around the number of infringements and things like that. Where will that data come to? Will that come to the the Joint Waste Committee, or will Council see that, or will that be publicly available, or all three?
Through you, Madam Mayor, great questions. We've never really had the availability of that data before, so we'll be adapting our approach to that. But certainly I would imagine that reporting on all of those matters would be good to understand the performance of that service. Certainly in our contract with our contractor, we do have some KPIs around data provision. And so I guess it's a matter of what would you like to see and what's some meaningful information to report on, because we can report on any sorts of combination of information. And given the Joint Waste Committee was instrumental in developing the joint WMMP, I would imagine they'll have a high interest in that, and whether it's delivering the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve.
Thank you. And through you, Your Worship, I just have two other questions.
Just before you move on, I think Adele, did you want to add something to that?
Okay. Thank you, John. My next question is around the communications. Will we see, so you mentioned that I suppose my question is, all of the communication, the key messages we've talked about today around bin size, rebate scheme, assisted service provision, the hard to collect areas, the multi-unit dwellings and the prohibited bin contents, will all of that be wrapped up in a hard copy communication that's delivered with the bin? And will that be accompanied with some, say, online communication as well? And so when will people see that communication? Is that September when the bins are rolled out? Is that prior to? Can we give some certainty around that communication?
Through the Mayor, I think this might actually be one for Craig, who's developing the communications plan.
Yeah, I think the campaign will start just prior to September when the first bins get delivered. A lot of what you mentioned is included in a hard copy. That book, it's a big education piece in it. I think it's about 8 to 10 pages long, mindful of having too much information in there, so it'll be read. But yes, that will be delivered to the community well before the start of the new service.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you. And just through you, Your Worship, my final question is around the submissions we received from some of our local operators, and we had Deborah present to us earlier today. And I suppose my question is around local procurement, and I know this was something we specifically were really conscious of following the WMMP submissions. And so my question is around the way that the tender document was written. In your view, did we allow local contractors an equal opportunity to be involved in that tender process? And I suppose I come at that from a position of, I understand we as council need to balance our fiduciary responsibility to deliver the best financial result for the ratepayer, whilst also being responsible to our locals as well in terms of procurement. So I'm really interested in your professional view on whether or not that tender document was written in a way that excluded our local operators.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for that question, Deputy Mayor Brosnan. Bring me back to the specific points if I miss them. It's worth reiterating a couple of key points here. We do have a responsibility to our public, given we're spending public money, to ensure a level playing field when it comes to seeking these services from a commercial contractor. And it's also worth noting that we need to, from a fair perspective, ensure that our contractors certainty around how we're going to assess each of the separate individual tenders for that service against each other and apply consistency to that and assure probity across the different and separate applications with regard to price and methodology. And so when we go out and seek this service, this is about gaining a service that meets the specifications and performance criteria that council as the client want, and being very clear about what we want so that both parties, when we enter into a contract, understand what we're getting for what we pay for. And so, yes, we do go out and we specify about what service we want, what the reporting requirements are, what the data provision requirements are, and what the KPIs around performance are. And that is good contract management practice. So when we entered into a joint procurement process with Hastings District Council for our refuse collection contract, Hastings District refuse collection contract, and Hastings District recycling contract. And we ran a multi-stage process where we considered both price and non-price attributes. The non-price attributes relate to methodology, health and safety, and a number of other aspects, relevant experience, track record. And so we held pre-tender meetings where local contractors were invited to attend, and many of them did. We were very clear that we appreciated that the scale of the service that we were seeking perhaps exceeded the capability of any of those private local parties at that point in time. And we talked about the possibility of joint ventures or aggregating up, or a joint venture approach that enabled multiple local parties to provide services within a single contract. Certainly, we're aware that one or two of those parties understood that and were quite keen to explore that. And I guess the rubber hits the road when you receive the tenders. I feel that we've done as much as we could to identify the opportunities within that space. Let's not also forget that there's been a lot of interest in council providing a green waste service, which would be an extra cost on rates that we have never had before. And at that point, that collection cost would probably be the equivalent of what we're paying in the refuse collection cost now. And so is quite a significant additional cost. So in council not entering into the provision of that service, it provides a distinct opportunity for private operators locally to adapt their service provision and enter that market. We talked about that in those meetings as well. At the time that we developed our procurement strategy and our tendering documents, that precedes the point at which the social and local procurements were mandatory in our rules, but we still incorporated that into our approach. So from my perspective, I feel that we've done what we can within our approach to enable that local involvement. I guess it's also a good opportunity to identify that the longer the term contract, the better it enables a private contractor to capitalise the cost of lending to provide for plant to service the contract across a longer period of time, which actually lowers the cost of that service to the client and therefore our ratepayers. It is a pretty standard approach. Our first term is a 7-year term with a 3-year right of extension. That's based on performance.
Thank
so
you,
that's
John.
not a guaranteed thing.
Councillor Mawson, followed by Councillor Bogue.
Yeah, thank you, John. Pretty easy one for you. I understand that the contract there, you've mentioned about the cameras and infringements. Can you confirm that as part of the contract that those trucks at the start of October will be fitted with the cameras?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm going to qualify that guarantee. That is the intention of the contract. However, the provision of that plant has been interrupted by our global COVID situation, and so I can't absolutely guarantee it. I can guarantee that it's the intention of the contract, but much the same with our recycling contract, where the contractor mobilised very quickly in a time frame that doesn't allow for new plant to be on the ground in day one. That is possibly a situation that we're in now. I don't have an absolute up-to-date information on where the new trucks for this contract are, but they're intended to have all the latest technology, cameras, recording, GPS, tracking, etc., etc.
Brilliant, thank you.
Councillor Bogue.
Yes, thank you, John. Just a suggestion and a question. And the suggestion, perhaps for the comms team, is that another way of extending public education on this, the wheelie bins, might be through the schools. And I'm not saying to go out to all the schools, but I know our aquarium staff has a very effective ongoing program of waste management, and many youngsters go through their doors and learn all sorts of helpful skills and attitudes through the education they do. And this could perhaps be something, seeing every household will get one of these wheelie bins, they might be able to help support the comms program at that educational level, because we know if kids start getting all excited about something, then the message will get to their parents. So just a suggestion. The other question, John, is about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate within the wheelie bins. And I'm just thinking, I've never had a wheelie bin, but I think they're a great idea. But there's a lot of yucky, smelly things that go into those plastic rubbish bags. food scraps and disposable nappies and whatever. And the temptation might be for people to put a big plastic bag inside their wheelie bin in order to minimise the amount of, cleaning they'll have to do after the wheelie bin's been emptied, which also may create problems for some people if they don't have facilities to properly do that, or they're infirm or disabled or whatever. But I just want to know, obviously one of the purposes is to reduce the number of big plastic bags going to the dump, but are they going to be considered to be inappropriate articles inside the wheelie bins if it's picked up that people are chucking all their rubbish into a plastic bag inside the wheelie bin? Is that going to be allowed or not?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, thank you for those suggestions. Always looking for better ways to engage with a wider audience on education, on waste minimisation, and I guess also our environmental initiatives. With regard to the wheelie bins, and there's a couple of key parameters there, particularly in Hawke's Bay's hot climate during summer. Then there is the potential for for some of those items disposed of to have an impact. I guess it'll be up to the individual as to whether they might choose to line their bin or not, and that may relate to whether they might clean it after dumping. And look, it'll vary from each individual property as to how they collect their waste inside the house, and then how they deposit it in their bin. So it's pretty hard to answer that question. Ideally, yes, one of the initiatives for a wheelie bin is to reduce the single-use plastic bags to landfill. And I guess the key there is reduce. I think it would be unrealistic to expect that would eliminate that in its entirety, but the more we can reduce and minimise, the better. And certainly, when it comes to food waste, there are ways to manage that impact, and I guess that's where people might also choose between a weekly and fortnightly collection outside of how much they have to put in their bin. I know that probably doesn't answer your question in an entirety, but I think it's so variable that it is a difficult question to answer.
Oh, sorry. But just following up, does that mean if I put my rubbish in a plastic bag, I'm not going to get tagged in a little note for being naughty or stop doing that or anything? It's not considered to be an inappropriate object to put in my wheelie bin?
Thank you for bringing me back around to the balance of your question, Councillor Bowe. I guess some of the prohibitive items are hot ashes. I think it'll be pretty clear whether someone's put hot ashes in their bin, because when the bin gets lifted, the ashes will no longer be in the bin. It will have melted through the base or the sides. But green waste is not something that you'd probably put in a bag before you put in your bin. What we often see is that goes in the top of the bin just before collection, or in the top of the bag just before collection. So they won't be opening up bags to determine what's in there. One of the other things is, heavy items, bricks, mortar, construction waste will probably be quite obvious to the camera. So they are looking for that view through the camera of what is coming out of the bin. So I don't think they'll be going to any length of opening up those bags. But equally, those bags will be coming out of inside the house, where a lot of the prohibited items aren't about residential waste in that regard.
Thank you, very helpful.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. John, just a question around data collection, going back to our ability to collect data. If the data that we collect shows that our goals around waste minimisation are not being met, and the current system that we're using is not achieving the things that we want it to achieve, is there any flexibility in our contract or our system to adjust for that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is a great question. I'm going to make an assumption here, and you'll nod or shake your head furiously as to whether that is, I guess, touching on the key point there. We are entering into a 7-year contract, and that's a 7-year term where the contractor has a guarantee of providing the service for us. And does that 7-year term allow us flexibility within the specification of what we're asking them to do? Is that kind of where you're coming from there, Councillor Wright? So, look, I'm going to use some contract terminology here with regard to variations to contract. So, you can look at variations to contract as a naughty thing or something that we don't want to enter into, but it's a formal process that you work through with your contractor to identify how we might alter the terms of that contract. It may or may not engender additional or a reduction in cost. So if what we're doing isn't enough or we want to do something differently, we always have that mechanism within the conditions of that contract to vary the service. It may come with a cost, but if we want to do more, it would always probably come with a cost. So there are some rules in which we have to operate with regard to that contract. But our contractors are experts in delivering the service, so we'd be looking to engage with them around what might work as we look to modify our service. So I would anticipate over that 7 years, yes, we might want to do more or do things differently, and we'd work with our contractor to do that. The variation to contract is perhaps the formal side of that.
Thank you.
Adele, did you have something to add to that?
Just through the Mayor, I just wanted to clarify the earlier question from Councillor Taylor, and just in relation to say that the curbside collection service is a targeted rate, and so that's based on actually receiving that particular service. And so, if there's any consideration for whether that service is required for that particular area or for that particular site, that could be then offset into future years. But because it is a targeted rate, it is charged for that year.
Thank you. Councillor Crystal, followed by Councillor Tapani, and
Just-
then Councillor McGrath.
Just following on from Councillor Mawson's question he had about the cameras, who's monitoring the camera?
Through you, Madam Mayor, good question. The truck driver. So they have to be stationary to lift the bin.
Yeah.
And so as that bin lifts, they are observing the camera, and they'll have, I'm going to put this in my terms, so this is how I understand it. Within the technology they have available in the truck, they'll have certain buttons they can push for certain things that they want to record, whether it has prohibited items in it or is overloaded or unable to be collected or what have you. So the truck driver will be responsible for that, and at the point where there may be an issue, I believe it can have a screenshot taken of that and stored against the data for that site and that bin lift.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Question for you, please, John. Surprise, surprise. This is really around the continued delivery and implementation of the WMMP. And I'm looking for, I've got 3 things for you to answer for me. The first is around when we had those submissions, there was a large portion on how we would build a communication and education strategy alongside the delivery. And I note that some of the questions, concerns coming from our community are around how we communicate and how we're taking our citizens on that journey. So I'm looking for an indicator from you around whether there is sufficient placement within the annual plan to achieve those goals, or I guess a step back would be when and how do we plan to incorporate an education component into our comms strategy, and is there sufficient resource currently to address that? The second question is by association. Government has indicated a significant increase in the levies associated with this delivery of service in the next 12 months, which will heighten the costs. Is there any opportunity in that developing thought to to appropriate or to use any of that levy for some of the WMMP, or is that specific in its focus? And the last item that I'd like you to give me some direction on is we've received a number of comments from the community around the recycling crates, their size, and their suitability for the task. And I'm thinking of the number of complaints around if you have a cardboard box that's too big to fit into that small plastic container, what do you do with it? And if the wind blows it out of the crate, whose job is it then to pick it up? So how are we addressing those concerns and those shortcomings in that model? And looking forward to your responses. Sorry, John. That's why I got you a glass of water, mate.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and certainly up here, appreciate the water. It's good water. All I can say is keep the questions rolling in. Yeah. So I'll do my best to answer this, and if I fall short, then please bring me back to the questions. I've got 3 points here. So with regards to the communication education, more specifically around our WMMP, that WMMP plan, I did identify a number of opportunities to improve our communities, of which we're a key part of, performance in waste minimisation and management. And I guess a couple of the key things that we're delivering on now is the renewal of our recycling collection and the renewal of our refuse collection contracts. And so, you know, we actually have more people in our team now than we've ever had, but I guess the demand on our resources associated with those contracts, particularly with the need to communicate and engage more around the specifics with assisted services and opt-in, opt-out, is quite a huge demand, and our capacity to pick up any further initiatives right now is limited. Notwithstanding, we also have an operation, particularly with our transfer station, to continue to deliver, and all that entails, which through COVID and lockdown has been significantly greater than normal day alert level 1 or business as usual operation. So once we have bedded in our new contracts and we're able to move on from the initial months of those contracts, then that will be the opportunity to start engaging in more of the WMMP initiatives, including that more wider, more encompassing communication and education around all things waste minimisation. So I guess it's a watch this space at this point in time, but we're certainly keen to lift the lid on all of that.
Supplementary question to that, if I might, Your Worship. So, looking to your expertise here again, John, given the workload on our staff at the moment and the schedule of planned work going forward, is there perhaps then an opportunity in the next 12 months, considering we're discussing the annual plan at the moment, for us to consider a fund which we might be able to use to initiate or activate some of our community-led programs, such as environment in schools, parakore. So rather than our own team who are under pressure and under the pump trying to find space and resource to do this, are there opportunities for us potentially to align with existing waste minimisation strategies in our community?
Great question. I guess still on point 1 of your tripartite questions. Absolutely, absolutely, there are opportunities, and I'm looking to the Deputy Mayor Brosnan here. That was a core part of the WMMP, recognising that actually council don't have to do all of these things in their entirety. A big part of the initiatives in the WMP was about facilitating and pulling together the parts of our community that are able and willing to do this as well. So yes, potentially a fund would help in that space. As resources become available, we'll be better able to facilitate that. And I guess tying into part 2 of your question with regard to the government increase in levies, and I'll touch on that in a little bit more detail, potentially that might help provide for some of the facilitation of those parties. Yeah. So shall I move on to part 2 of the question, or is there any supplementaries on that?
Not from me, you're free to go.
Move
Free
on.
to go. Okay, so the second part of your question was the government increases in levies. So it's probably quite important to just identify there's two levies. One is the emissions trading scheme levies that's levied against every tonne of waste going to landfill. So that is increasing in future. And then there's the waste minimisation levy, which is or was $10 per tonne of every tonne going into landfill, was set to increase. Currently, that levy is split into kind of two tranches of money. The other one tranche comes back to the entity or the local government entity in which that waste is deposited at landfill to fund waste minimisation initiatives, and the other is open to applications for funding for waste minimisation initiatives from any party, whether it's local government or private or what have you. So I believe the increase in the levy for that specifically will help to fund more initiatives in that space. And ideally, I think we're already becoming aware of initiatives to bring markets for recycled goods locally in New Zealand, where currently we don't have those sorts of solutions. So looking at a more circular economy in regard to waste minimisation and recycling. The third part, comments on recycling crates and their suitability. That was a key part of the waste minimisation management plan considerations. And there has, I guess, as part of that, the questions been asked, why didn't we move to a wheelie bin for recycled product as well? And there are some very, very good reasons for that. So one of the real benefits of having our current crate system is that the products that go into those bins are sorted by the individuals prior to putting them in the bin, and then again at curbside. So that system is actually favoured by quite a wide cross-section of New Zealand because you're not getting cross-contamination of those products into other products. So, for example, a real success story for the Hawke's Bay is our cardboard and fibre is recycled locally, and that go into the production of fruit trays produced within the Hawke's Bay and for international market provision. If that product stream was mixed with anything else, specifically glass, it would become contaminated to the point where it couldn't be used for food purposes. At the point where you have a mixed product across all of those streams, then there's a mechanical process, which is quite an intense process, that would be required to separate them all out again. So it's pushing the responsibility for sorting that back onto the individual property owner, but also the second sorting of that is at the curbside. So that delivers a much higher quality product that is better able to be recycled and attract higher commodity prices in the recycling market. So there are multiple benefits there in terms of the service that we have. With regard to windblown product, no, it's not our contractor's job to chase that. Otherwise, they would be further challenged to complete the collections on a daily basis as they are already. And so that's where perhaps how you stack bins or what have you is quite key. Putting the bin out in the morning can help reduce that risk. It won't eliminate it. But that's always going to be a challenge, I believe. With regard to having a big cardboard box that doesn't fit in your plastic crate, well, I can't speak for everybody else, but personally I have a lot of cardboard that I spend 5 minutes cutting the cardboard box up into sizes and pieces that will fit in that bin. And while that cardboard may be slightly proud of the lip of that container, the amount of cardboard I put in there is jammed that tight that nothing will fly out. So that's personally how I do it. There's probably other mechanisms, but breaking that cardboard box down to a point where it can fit in the bin is one of those. Council staff are appreciative of the fact that the recycling drop-off centre on Austin Street has closed. Again, that was a commercial decision. The team are acutely aware of the need to have a similar drop-off centre, ideally close to the main users. The challenge in that, being able to locate something like that, is there can be a bit of a NIMBY situation where it's not in my backyard. And so that is an initiative that we are looking to explore when more time becomes available. And I think I've covered all of those.
Yes, you
Yep.
have. No more questions from me. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank
Very-
you, John.
Very good. Just before we move on to Councillor McGrath's question, I've just been given a note to just let you all know, when you're not using your mics, could you please don't push the stems up, actually move the mic to the side or swivel it slightly, because moving the stem up interferes with the room sound management and can weaken the unit. So... And a demonstration from, the whole unit.
No hands?
Okay, thank you. Councillor McGrath.
Yeah, just through the chair, this is not for you, John. Take a break. Take a break. Coming back to the comms question earlier, and so probably more directed to Craig, Hastings have rolled their bins out 3 months ago or so. Does that give us an opportunity to work with them and talk with their comms team about how they did things and what issues and worries they had to work through? Are we looking to work with these guys?
I think Cameron's been in contact with the Hastings team, and we've worked very closely with, obviously, Cam's team. A lot of effort has gone into this comms plan. We have seen the material that Hastings has produced, so we are across it all, yes.
Yes.
Very good. Lots of great questions. So if there's no more questions, I'll just put the Councillor Brown.
Sorry. Just, we had a concern raised around the health and safety that potentially is increased due to wheelie bins. Can you just confirm that we did a risk assessment and that on balance the bins were hopefully a safer option than bags?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Good question. Thank you, Councillor Brown. The health and safety sorry, bit of feedback there. The health and safety aspect of the wheelie bins is as much about what happens at Curbside or with the residents looking to dispose of rubbish as it is on the contractors providing that service. And so I guess it's a matter of balance. Any particular waste products that you might put in a rubbish bag do have a possibility of poking out of that bag and cutting people, and that happens now and is a health and safety issue for our contractors now. On any given day, our contractors are, and technically 2 bags per property, collecting from anywhere between 2,500 to 3,500 properties a day, if not more. That's a lot of lifts per day on these contractors, and it does create health and safety issues for them now that the contractor has to manage. So that's the contractor side of health and safety, and the wheelie bins and the lifting arms and automation of that addresses that adequately for them. With regard to the I guess the per resident health and safety issue, while there are specifics, I guess, with wheelie bins on steps, that's where we would look to work with those residents where that challenge is perhaps very real for them, to figure out how we might address that. And there's no single one answer to that. That will have to be worked through with them. Where people feel like a wheelie bin may be ungainly for them, that's where we do have the assisted service option for those residents, whether they're mobility related or age related or what have you. We'll consider all of those, but certainly, a criteria for that won't just be inconvenience of a wheelie bin. Otherwise, we'd be overwhelmed with that, and we would need more trucks and more people to deliver that service, which means more money.
So, So I take it the answer is yes, we have done a risk assessment?
To a certain degree, yes, but it probably ultimately came down to will a contractor continue to pick up bags? And as I mentioned earlier, no contractor that tendered was prepared to continue to pick up bags. So in that regard, it kind of eliminates a lot of options.
Okay, thank you. So just to put forward some wording to go with this item, please. Just note that there is a communication plan in place and further information will be shared with the community both in the lead up to and with the delivery of the wheelie bins. If there's anything further any other councillors would like to add to this particular item, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Please.
Very good. We will move on to our next item, being the Napier Library Civic Precinct. Again, an informed piece, which we did receive some very positive feedback on. And I would just note that the submissions that did come through will be fed through into the working group that's been developed for this particular project for consideration in the master plan development for the library on the Station Street site. Now that steering group, working group, consists of a number of key community stakeholders alongside staff and Deputy Mayor Brosnan, Councillor Wright and Councillor Crystal. So again, I will open up for questions. Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Not so much of a question, but more a statement. Just in reading the submissions, I think there was, I think that's a fantastic result. Only 5% disagreeing with our decision around placement. And I think that's almost as good as it gets in terms of consultation and feedback. So just wanted to make the point that there were a number of submissions that made reference to specific design criteria that we should consider in the library development, and just further on your wording, Your Worship, that will come back through recommendations from the working group in the master plan development.
No questions? I think we all agree this is just an exciting project that we want to crack on with. Yeah, you're off the hook, Richard. John's sitting there thinking, what's all that about? Oh, look, here we go, Councillor Crystal.
It was just regarding the Taradale residents' submission about the Taradale Library, and I guess what the plans are for that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can confirm that a contract has been entered into for the seismic strengthening, which should start in a couple of weeks' time. And the HVAC system is underway in terms of looking at that, and there's some improvements planned to go into the LTP, including a bit of refreshment and the full carpet replacement. So.
Excellent. So again, some wording here is note that the community feedback received in the submissions will be forwarded to the Civic Precinct Steering Group for consideration in the master plan development for the development of the library on the Station Street site. That's fine. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, kia ora. Could you provide for me confidence, that's what I'm after, that the original plan around the Civic Centre we were all sort of, moving back into the old library was one of the options which has always been on the table, but now that we are moving into a space of looking at that entire sector of the CBD, will that broadening of that focus result in a delay in moving into that building? Or are we still expecting to move out of the MTG roughly about the same time as we've already indicated to the community? So will the trifecta effectively delay the ability to move into the library if that's our choice?
I think there is a lot of work to be done to get that to a state where the move would be able to be done, really. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done in not just the master planning, but actually even refurb or whatever you wanted to do. And to be fair, the actual location within the precinct of what the facilities is yet to be determined. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Thank you.
On that note, can I please suggest that we add another point in here that a communication plan be developed to inform the community on the Civic Precinct project. Do we need more detail?
You could just say in line with the terms of reference for
Okay.
the steering group, which has the development of a comms plan.
Excellent. And just a third point to touch on the Taradale Library, if we just note that the seismic strengthening is scheduled. What was the time frame for that one, Antoinette? The seismic strengthening it?
It should commence in 2 weeks' time, I
Oh,
understand.
okay. Excellent. And just further to that, is there other more extensive upgrades included in the current long-term plan in line with the Taradale Residents Association submission?
Not in the current long-term plan, but they will be considered in the next long-term plan.
So if we just add on to that, and further upgrades will be considered as part of the 2021 to 2031. Is that the one we're doing next? Yeah.
Yep.
Long-term plan. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Just following on from that, do we have to close the library for those renovations? And if so, have we communicated that with the public?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not really in a position to comment on that right now. While I've signed off the contract, don't have the detail at front of mind to be able to make a decent comment.
Right, if there's no further comments, we'll move on to the next item, being the street management, which again was an inform item with regards to the additional CCTV cameras proposed and security around our streets. So I would open up for questions, please. Councillor Tapani?
Yes, thank you.
That was a raised hand?
Yes, that was a question. I'm really struggling with this one. So I understand the value of our CCTV. I understand its current condition and the need for us to consider investing in replacing a potentially ready-to-collapse digital system and the value of moving that in-house. And it's great to see good spread from our city. I would like to understand what level of assessment was done around any service that we might choose to deliver going forward. I remember when this came to council that mention was made that the cameras were mostly fixed, pointing in a fixed direction at a time when city vibrancy and life happened to be in that part of a town. And then for approximately 10 years, the focus of the city moved to other parts of the city, but the cameras did not move. And it just so happens now that the activity has moved back to some areas where the cameras are, and I'm down Hastings Streets and down those areas of the CBD. And so the city activity is now back within the scope of those cameras. My concern is that we seem to still have a very strong focus on fixed CCTV on a fixed location, and there doesn't appear to be any learnings from the last sort of 15 years where those cameras were recording nothing for a period. And I'm wondering what our thinking is around providing a CCTV service that meets the needs of the future. How adaptable is the system?
Through the Mayor, I can respond to that, Councillor Tapani. As you will recall, we did an S17A review of the street management program, part of which was the CCTV network, and at the same time we were advised of the current state of the current network. The response to date is that the actual design of the network would be part of the procurement process. And I think today we heard, and through some of the other submissions, some really good ideas around what we could include in such a network. And I think it would be a great idea to explore those further with some of those respondents, particularly around things that may have not been included in the current thinking around CCTV networks. So the submission this morning, whereby thinking about the licence plate recognition, maybe in terms of exits and entries into the CBD, that could cover off some of the crime that may be happening on Napier Hill, which we understand is going on, and other suburbs as well that could be included. The technology has shifted significantly since the initiation of the CCTV network all those years ago, and I think it would be fair to say that we'd be guided by the industry around what would be available now to meet our needs. So I hope that answers some of the questions. So I guess the answer is that will all be developed as part of the procurement process and tendering process.
And have you got an indicator when that might be back before council?
Subject to your approval of the funding, okay. We would be able to set up a project plan around that.
Lovely. Thank you, Natasha.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you. Just discussion on this from me. So in reading the submissions, what became apparent to me is that everyone was really in support of council taking over the running of the cameras primarily, and there were a lot of sort of questions and almost requests for where they might go in the submissions. And so what I thought in terms of a way forward, in terms of our resolution, it might be something along the lines of that I think council needs to probably develop if we're going to take on this, a placement and management policy for our CCTV camera network, and for me that needs to include a privacy policy as well, which I know a lot of councils hold when they're collecting visual data like this as well, with us obviously being covered by Lagoima. So that's what I'd like to put on the table for discussion, is that we proceed and that we develop a camera placement and management policy, including privacy policy.
If I may, through you, Madam Chair, Council has an existing CCTV policy which includes privacy matters, so we could talk about an expansion of that. Yeah.
Even better, thank you, DV.
Okay, so Councillor Price.
Just a quick comment, because I'm on the Napier Safety Trust, which runs CCTV cameras now, and as Councillor Tapani said, it needs urgent work. It is cameras throughout the world are a sign of the times of being necessary. And I think a prime example was of the presenter this morning. If there had been good cameras on the outskirts of the city, probably where they are now, they would have tied into that vehicle and links the registration plate, because a lot of people in having domestic setups don't have the cameras that can read number plates, but they can identify the vehicle, which then ties in the link. So it's important on the outskirts that we have good quality cameras. Monitoring all the time is outstanding, because if you are going to just go back and view what's happened, it doesn't happen. It takes hours to view an hour. It just doesn't happen. You've got to be there and then operating off what you see there and then. Thank you.
And through you, Your Worship, to you, Councillor Price, having a lot of involvement in that network so far, would you say there is a risk to council in taking over the network, that whenever there is spikes in crime around the city, we're approached to install cameras, and that there needs to be some kind of rigour around a decision making about when we put cameras in and how we manage them?
You've got to have a real policy, because everybody want one in their street, and you can't do that. But by putting them in the appropriate places with the software you can get with them now, you link in to the whole city with less cameras in every street.
Thank you.
Councillor Bogue.
Yes, part of the street management program is, of course, the street patrols, and the concern has been originally beggars and homeless people on the street, so that's been part of the concern. And I just wondered, I do still see beggars in parts of the suburbs in Narewa, and I just wanted to ask, through you, Madam Mayor, perhaps Natasha, what is the situation when people say they're homeless? I understood that those people were being housed in transitional emergency housing in the motels. So if I could just have a bit of a quick update on that, please.
Sure, through the Mayor. So as you would be aware, during lockdown in particular and through level 3, there was a significant effort made to house rough sleepers right throughout the country. And here in Hawke's Bay, the Housing First program actually managed to place most of the rough sleepers into emergency housing, motels, as you said, Councillor Bogue. They have largely been retained into that accommodation with contracts that we understand to go into next year. And as a result, we have seen a huge reduction in rough sleeping and the associated issues such as begging. However, there is still a small amount of begging occurring in Napier and in some of the suburbs, as you say. The street patrols have continued right throughout and continue to provide us with good information about what is happening in that area. The street management review did discuss options going forward for the patrols, and we need to look at that as a secondary phase of the street management program once we've addressed the CCTV matter. In that, how are those CCTV cameras monitored and in conjunction with potential patrols? The recommendation has been that we take on a more ambassadorial approach, which would fit in nicely with some of the new initiatives such as Housing First that are operating in the city now, to be able to work with those individuals who need that intense help.
Thank you, that's very helpful and encouraging.
Councillor Tapani?
Yes, please. Just one more question to our team around the cameras. Is there a part of the strategy which enables our staff to engage with the business sector and to perhaps identify any who may wish to volunteer access to their cameras in key locations? Is that also a part of the strategy, or are we looking to cover the entire city solely on the city budget?
Through the Mayor, so some private cameras may not be able to be linked up with a network, so I think that would be something we'd have to ascertain in terms of once we'd establish what technology we would purchase and whether that has the ability to link in other camera networks. But certainly the Business Association are well aware of the matter, and I'm sure we'll be in full cooperation going forward.
Thank you,
Councillor
Natasha.
Price.
Just further to that, you'd want to be very careful when you offer the facility to other people, because you'll have every shop in town want to be on it. There's got to be a way of linking to them, but you'd want to have a strong policy in place as to how you became involved in it, otherwise it would be too big to monitor.
Good advice. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just suggest some wording for this resolution around that a review of the current CCTV policy will be undertaken to include guidelines around placement of cameras. Did you have some additional wording that you'd like to include with that, Deputy Mayor?
If we see placement of cameras, management and privacy matters.
Management and privacy matters. Thank you. Councillor Bogue.
Just another
Otherwise known as
question,
Sheree.
sorry. I appreciate this is mostly around the CBD, but will this placement of CCTV cameras include Maraenui, because there is a real lack of CCTV coverage and very poor lighting in the shopping centre, because the lights in the verandas are the responsibility of individual shopkeepers, but there have been security concerns expressed to me about lack of adequate lighting and good CCTV there also.
Through the Mayor, so the CCTV network is anticipated to be included in all the shopping centres that it currently operates within, but we may have the option of extending that to shopping centres maybe not covered already, and looking at the placement and scope of the camera coverage, including the clarity, which would include assessing lighting, etc. So yes is the answer.
Great, thanks.
Councillor Price.
Can you put the recommendation up again? Go away, Maxie. So in light of the funding being allocated, we will get that done. Not just going to review it, we're going to fund it as well? Yeah.
So you would like that to be reworded to say,
The funding, and as part of the funding, this is what we'll do. We haven't actually said we're going to fund it.
no, but that will be the decision. So I think it's a given that we would only review the CCTV policy if the funding is approved. But happy to put some different wording around that if you'd like to.
Now, so we could, I think we should add in the approving the funding as well.
Subject to approval of the funding?
Yeah.
Does that, through you, Madam Chair, does that resolution need to include the technical capabilities of any cameras? That, if other people are offering up their cameras, should our policy not have a provision in it around the technical standards expected?
So if we were extending that
Including the technical capabilities.
Yeah.
Could that be a review of the system, the camera system, the current policies?
Yep.
That would cover it, wouldn't it? Reviewing the current system, which is your cameras and what.
Yep. So do you want to put some words around that,
A
Councillor
review
Price?
of the current CCTV system and policy. Okay. That covers it, Nigel?
Well, that would be the cameras that are operated by us, but would we not need a criteria around cameras that others are offering to incorporate?
That would be part of the system and policy, wouldn't it?
Okay. Yep.
Can I
Councillor
just clarify what you're asking? Is it not the funding for the actual CCTV project, is that not already in the budget on what we're approving today? Or do we need to make a specific recommendation to include it in the budget in this?
No, that will be adopted as part of this annual plan.
Okay.
And through the Mayor, just noting that because it was an informed piece, it was included in the budgets for the current year.
So you don't need to put it in.
Councillor Brown suggesting we don't need to have subject to funding approval in there. Are you happy for that to be taken out, Councillor Price? Is that was your request to include it?
Can I suggest?
No, I like it in there.
Through you, Madam Mayor, how big do we want to go? Have we got enough funding there?
That's,
We've got 500,000.
yeah, so that was my, when we were originally informed about the need to investigate the CCTV situation for Napier, the $500,000 was not going to cover the full cost of replacement, but instead provide us with an opportunity to conduct that assessment and consider whether we should bring it within house. So at some stage, I expect that will result in us having to make a follow-up decision around the level of investment in implementing the recommendations from that assessment.
Okay. We'll leave it as is for now.
Would that probably, what we're talking about, what Uppy just said, would get us to the LTP,
Yeah.
where we might need more, will need more?
Very good. Thank you. If there's no further questions, that actually brings us to the conclusion of the, Councillor Bowie.
Sorry, hang on. Sorry, here we go. I just wondered if it would be possible or appropriate to mention something in there about the possible inclusion of appropriate shopping centres, just to broaden the scope a little bit in the wording. Would that be able to be done without diminishing the CBD?
I think that will be covered off in the development of the policy, Councillor Bogan. So we're talking at a high level around the placement of cameras, and that's not just specific to the CBD. The placement of cameras will be considered across the whole of the city and surrounding suburbs.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So I have a question of the group that's working on that. And so that is, with the pandemic situation that we've currently going through again, will placement also consider the supermarkets in Napier so that in the event of another lockdown, our citizens will have an online view of the queue at each supermarket to mitigate the pressure upon our essential workers?
So again, that will be part of the policy development,
just
that
signalling,
level
I
of
hope it is.
detail.
Thank you.
Richard?
Through the Mayor, I'm not answering that question, but washing my hands off that one. Anyway, I did want to just suggest that there's kind of two parts to this. There's the capital purchase of the CCTV, and then there's the bigger question of what you do with that information, how you look at it, and kind of, you know, managing effects from that, which is something that will be more of a long-term plan consideration. So it's like this is the forerunner into the bigger piece.
Okay, thank you. So actually, just before I move on to the next part of deliberations, I did just want to give an update. Antoinette has provided us with some further detail around the Taradale Library seismic strengthening, just to advise from Darren Gillies, the manager of our library services, that at this stage it's not anticipated there will be any closure required. The work will take approximately 4 to 6 weeks, and communications will be shared on a frequent basis around that. So just to share that. So as I was saying, that brings us to the conclusion of the specific consultation items which were included in the draft annual plan. We will now move to considering the funding requests, and then after that we will have a session around all the other items and submissions that were made that didn't directly relate to the specific consultation items. We are due to adjourn at 3:10 for an afternoon tea break, and I think it's actually quite a natural sort of place to stop now a few minutes early before we launch into the funding requests. And what time are we due back from afternoon tea? 3:30? Is that a...
We could come
That's
back
sufficient time.
Yeah.
3:25.
20 past.
Yeah. Okay. 3:25. That's a 20-minute break. Yep. Excellent. Thank you.
You made me feel good.